Every Tuesday for 25 years, she sat alone on the same bench, clutching a fading photo. When Keanu asked why, he uncovered a promise so powerful and a truth so heartbreaking. You won't believe how it ends. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Every Tuesday morning, after finishing his volunteer shift at the downtown shelter, Keanu Reeves would walk past the old bus station on 5th and Main. It had become a habit, a quiet ritual, to end his mornings by watching the steady hum of the city coming alive. People hurried to work, teenagers laughed at inside jokes, travelers checked maps on their phones. But amid all the movement, there was always one still point. The woman. She sat on the same weathered bench every single week, rain or shine, her hands folded neatly in her lap, a worn photograph tucked between them. She was elderly, maybe in her late 70s, her frame small but upright, wrapped in a faded blue cardigan that had seen better days. Most passers-by didn't notice her, or if they did, they quickly looked away. To them, she blended into the background, just another piece of the scenery in a busy city. But Keanu noticed. He noticed the way she always arrived at the same time, just after the first morning buses cleared. He noticed how she would glance up expectantly every time a new bus pulled in, scanning the passengers' faces with the kind of hope that didn't wither easily. And he noticed that every time no one came for her, she would tuck the photo back into her lap and simply wait for the next. For months he observed her from a respectful distance, wondering about her story, wondering who she was waiting for, wondering how someone could wait so long with so little sign of change. Finally, one Tuesday in late autumn, the air sharp and brittle around him, Keanu decided he couldn't just keep walking by. He crossed the small concrete square, hands in his pockets, approaching slowly so he wouldn't startle her. She didn't look up right away. Only when his shadow stretched across her shoes did she lift her head, her eyes soft and unsurprised. "Mind if I sit?" Keanu asked gently. The woman gave a small, welcoming nod. He lowered himself onto the bench beside her, leaving plenty of space. For a while he said nothing, letting the sounds of the station fill the silence. Engines rumbling, voices calling, the shuffle of tired feet on pavement. Finally, he glanced at the photograph resting in her lap. It was old, the colors faded almost to sepia, but the image was still clear enough. A teenage boy, maybe 18, smiled shyly at the camera. His hair was a little long, his jeans worn at the knees. There was a kindness in his face, but also something unsettled, as if he hadn't yet learned where to put his pain. Keanu nodded toward the photo. "Is that your son?" The woman's smile was slow, but sure. "Yes, that's Jason." Keanu let the silence linger a little longer, giving her the space to decide if she wanted to continue. She didn't seem in a rush. She just kept looking at the photo like she was memorizing it all over again, every line of her son's face. After a few moments, she spoke, her voice low but steady. "May I promise he'd meet me here?" Keanu turned slightly toward her, listening. 25 years ago, she continued, smoothing the edges of the photo with careful fingers. "The day he went into rehab, he hugged me and said, 'No matter what, Mom, I'll find you here.'" Her gaze stayed fixed on the horizon beyond the station, where the buses came and went. "I told him I'd be right here, waiting. Every Tuesday." Keanu felt something shift inside him, a tightness he hadn't expected. 25 years. Most people would have moved on. Most would have told themselves it was time to stop hoping. But here she was, still waiting, still believing. "What's your name?" Keanu asked gently. "Margaret," she said, offering a small smile. He nodded, committing it to memory. "Margaret? Have you heard anything from him since then?" She shook her head, but without bitterness. Only a quiet, unshaken faith. "Not a letter, not a call. But I figured maybe he lost his way. Maybe he didn't know how to find me right away." She touched the photo again. So I made it easy. Same bench, same day, every week. Keanu sat back, trying to absorb the depth of that commitment. 25 years of showing up, never knowing if it would be the day. Most people stopped believing after a few weeks, a few months, maybe a year. Margaret had kept believing for a quarter of a century. What about your family? Friends? Keanu asked. Anyone helping you look for him? Her eyes softened. At first, yes. But people get tired. They tell you it's time to move on. They mean well. She paused. They just don't understand what it's like to carry hope like this. It's not heavy after a while. It becomes part of you. Keanu looked out at the street, watching a bus pull in, unload, and drive away again. Have you ever thought about stopping? He asked quietly. Margaret considered the question seriously, not brushing it off. Sometimes, she admitted. There were days I told myself, Margaret, maybe this is foolish. She smiled sadly. But then I'd think, what if today's the day he comes? What if I miss it? Keanu understood in that moment that Margaret wasn't just waiting for her son. She was keeping a promise to be there, no matter how long it took. Keanu leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, feeling the full gravity of Margaret's words settle between them. Around them, life moved on. Buses came and went. People hurried past without glancing their way. But on that bench, time felt suspended. What was he like? Keanu asked, keeping his voice soft. Margaret's smile returned, this time a little brighter, like a fragile beam of sunlight breaking through gray clouds. Jason was kind, she said, kind to the core. Even when he got into trouble, even when he made bad choices, there was always this gentleness about him. She paused, the memories flooding her voice. He used to pick wildflowers and bring them home to me. Little bouquets, half of them were weeds, but he'd present them like they were gold. She laughed quietly at the memory. He had this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the world, even when he couldn't keep himself together. Keanu listened, picturing a young man who had carried a deep tenderness inside him, one that addiction hadn't fully erased. What happened? When he went into rehab, he asked gently. Margaret sighed. It was his choice. He hit a point where he didn't want to live that way anymore. He checked himself in. I was so proud of him. Her hands tightened slightly around the photo. The night before he went in, he hugged me and said, I'll find you, Mom, after this is over. He promised. And you believed him, Keanu said. I still do, Margaret replied without hesitation. There was no desperation in her voice, no clinging hope that had turned bitter over time, just steady faith, polished by years of waiting. Keanu sat back, taking a deep breath. Most people wouldn't understand her. They would call it denial, foolishness, refusal to accept reality. But Keanu saw it for what it truly was: unconditional love, a love that didn't expire, even when the world said it should have. As another bus pulled in, Margaret's eyes flickered toward the door. Passengers stepped down one by one, businessmen, students, a woman carrying a child. Margaret's gaze scanned each face, just as she had hundreds of times before. None of them were Jason, but she didn't look disappointed. She just looked ready. Keanu stayed a little longer, watching her wait, feeling a strange ache in his chest. He realized then that Margaret wasn't just keeping a promise to Jason. She was teaching anyone who cared to notice about the kind of love that refuses to quit, the kind of hope that refuses to die, even when everything else says it should. As he stood to leave, he looked down at her and said, "If you ever need anything, I'll be around." Margaret smiled warmly, as if she already knew. "Thank you," she said, "but I'm right where I need to be." And with that, she turned her attention back to the arriving buses. He's still waiting, still believing. The next Tuesday, Keanu returned to the bus station. He hadn't planned it. He told himself he was just passing by. But deep down he knew he was drawn back because of her, Margaret, and the quiet strength she carried. When he spotted her sitting there again, in the same spot, he approached with more confidence this time. She welcomed him with a soft smile, like she had been expecting him. Keanu sat down beside her. For a few minutes, they said nothing, watching the buses roll in and out. Then, without a word, Margaret reached into her worn purse and pulled out the photo. She held it out to him carefully, as if passing over a piece of something sacred. Keanu took it gently. The photo was even more fragile up close. The corners were bent, the gloss worn away. Jason's face looked back at him. A young man frozen in time. His hair was tousled, falling over one eye. His smile was slight, almost shy. But it was his eyes that caught Keanu's breath. Kind eyes, but haunted too. There was a weight behind them, a heaviness that spoke of battles fought alone. It was 18 when this was taken, Margaret said softly, just a few months before he decided he needed help. Keanu turned the photo over, careful not to crease it. On the back, in faded blue ink, someone had scrawled a message in hurried handwriting. "No matter what, Mom. I'll find you." Keanu stared at the words for a long time, feeling the gravity behind them. A promise made with all the hope of youth and all the desperation of someone afraid of losing his place in the world. Margaret folded her hands in her lap, watching him. "Ham gave me that photo the night before he checked into rehab," she said. "Told me to keep it safe, said it was his way of making sure I'd never forget he was trying." Keanu looked up at her. "I don't think he ever wanted you to think he forgot." Margaret smiled, a sad but steady smile. "I never thought he did. I just think maybe life got harder than he knew how to handle." Keanu nodded slowly. He had seen it before, the way life could weigh down the strongest souls, especially those who already carried too much inside them. "What was he like growing up?" he asked. Margaret's eyes lit up a little, the sadness giving way to fondness. "Oh, he was a handful," she said with a chuckle. "Smart as a whip, always asking questions, always wanting to know how things worked." She shook her head affectionately. "And he had music in his bones. Picked up a guitar when he was 8 and never put it down." Keanu listened, picturing Jason not just as a missing person, but as a full life. A boy who had once dreamed big dreams, who had been loved fiercely, and who had loved back just as fiercely. Margaret leaned back against the bench, her gaze drifting upward as she remembered. "Hal used to write songs, you know," she said. "Not the kind you'd hear on the radio. They were simple, rough little things, but they always had heart." Keanu imagined a younger Jason strumming an old guitar in a bedroom filled with posters and hope, a boy dreaming of a life bigger than the one addiction would later steal piece by piece. "Had sit on the front porch for hours just playing and humming whatever came to mind," Margaret continued. "Sometimes he wrote songs for me." Her voice broke slightly, but she smiled through it. "Silly ones about making the best spaghetti in the world or how I let him stay up late." Keanu chuckled softly at the thought. "What happened?" he asked gently. Margaret exhaled slowly, her hands tightening in her lap. "It started when he was about 15, she said. "He got in with the wrong group. You know how it goes. Just a little partying at first, a little drinking, then other things." She paused, searching for the right words. "He never meant to slip so far. He always swore he was stronger than it. But addiction's a storm most kids don't see coming until they're already drowning." Keanu nodded. He had heard similar stories during his time working with the shelter. Stories of good kids who were pulled under before anyone realized they were in trouble. "By 17, he was getting arrested," Margaret said quietly. "Petty stuff at first, fighting, shoplifting, then worse." Her eyes grew distant, as if she were watching scenes replay she would rather forget. "But he never stopped being kind," she said firmly. Even at his worst, he would apologize after every bad night. He never wanted to hurt anyone. Keanu felt a deep ache in his chest for both of them. For a mother who had watched her son disappear slowly, piece by piece, and for a boy who had never wanted to let go in the first place. "What made him decide to go to rehab?" Keanu asked. Margaret smiled sadly. Calm night, he came home, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "I'm tired, Mom. I'm tired of hurting you. I need to get better." She wiped a tear from the corner of her eye, but kept her voice steady. Mel checked himself in the next morning. Said he didn't want me to come with him. Said it was something he had to do alone. Keanu studied the fading photograph again. "No matter what, Mom, I'll find you." Jason had made a promise, and Margaret had made one too, in her own quiet way. She would be there when he was ready, no matter how long it took. Margaret reached into her purse again, this time pulling out a folded slip of paper, yellowed with age and creased down the middle. She handed it to Keanu with careful hands. "This was the address of the rehab center he went to," she said. "Closed down years ago. I checked, but there was nothing left. No records. No forwarding information. Just gone." Keanu unfolded the paper, studying the faded ink. It was a facility he hadn't heard of, probably one of the many small programs that quietly disappeared when funding dried up. He could feel the helplessness Margaret must have felt when the trail went cold. "Did you ever hire someone to look for him?" Keanu asked gently. "I tried," Margaret said. "A few years in, but it's hard when you don't have anything recent. No last address, no phone number. He was over 18. No one would release information to me." She looked out toward the street, where another bus rolled in and passengers climbed down, scattering like leaves. "So I kept coming here," she said simply. "Every Tuesday. Same time, same place, because if he remembered anything, it would be this." Keanu folded the paper again and gave it back to her. He sat quietly, feeling the weight of everything she carried. It wasn't just grief. It wasn't even just hope. It was faith. A stubborn, beautiful kind of faith that refused to bend to time or silence. He thought about how easy it would have been for her to stop. How understandable it would have been for her to give up. But she hadn't. And maybe, just maybe, that kind of belief deserved help. Maybe it deserved another pair of eyes looking for Jason. Keanu turned toward her, making a decision he didn't even have to think through. "I want to help," he said. Margaret's eyes widened slightly, the first true spark of surprise he'd seen from her. "You don't have to do that," she said, softly. "I know," Keanu replied, "but I want to." He could see the hesitation in her face, the way life had taught her not to expect too much from promises anymore. But after a moment, she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. Keanu smiled. "We'll start with what we have." He looked again at the photograph, the slip of paper, the quiet legacy of a boy who had once believed enough to promise he would find his way home. And Keanu made his own promise then, silently. He would help carry that hope. He would follow the music, the memories, the tiny threads Jason had left behind. Because if Margaret could sit on this bench for 25 years without giving up, then surely he could do his part to help bring her son back to her, one step at a time. The next day, Keanu sat at his desk at the Foundation's office, the fading photograph of Jason tucked carefully into a folder beside him. His mind kept circling back to Margaret's words, the way she had said them without bitterness, without expectation, only faith. He opened his laptop and logged into the Foundation's private online forum. It was a space built for sharing anonymous stories, a place where people could leave pieces of themselves without fear of judgment. Keanu knew that if anyone could understand Margaret's kind of waiting, it would be here. He stared at the blank post window for a long moment, then began to type. "There's a woman who sits on a bench every Tuesday. She's been waiting for 25 years, waiting for her son, who promised he would meet her there after rehab. She has nothing left but a photograph, some fading words, and a heart that refuses to give up. Most people told her to move on, but she's still there, still waiting, because sometimes love isn't about results. It's about being there when no one else is. Have you ever waited for someone you loved, even when others told you to give up? He reread the post twice, then hit publish before he could overthink it. Within minutes, notifications began trickling in. By the end of the hour, there were dozens of replies. By the end of the day, there were thousands. Keanu leaned back in his chair, scrolling through story after story. Parents who had waited for children lost to addiction, friends who sat outside hospital rooms, lovers who wrote letters to people who might never return. One reply stopped him. "I waited 5 years for my brother to get clean. Everyone told me he was gone for good. I showed up at every family gathering with a plate for him anyway. He finally came home." Sometimes love doesn't get an ending, but it still matters. Keanu read that last line over and over. Sometimes love doesn't get an ending, but it still matters. It wasn't about the reunion, he realized. It was about the faith. The act of waiting itself was the love. Even if Jason never came back, Margaret's waiting wasn't wasted. It was a living promise, and that meant something. It meant everything. Keanu opened a new document and began copying comments, notes, fragments of hope. He wanted to build a collection, not just for Margaret, but for himself too. A reminder that in a world rushing toward closure and easy answers, sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was simply not to give up. Not on a day, not on a bench, not on a promise. As Keanu scrolled through the stories pouring in, he noticed patterns. There were mothers who wrote about sons they hadn't seen in decades, still setting a place for them at the holiday table. Fathers who left porch lights on every night, hoping one day a shadow would appear at the door. Sisters who kept voicemail accounts active just to hear a voice that the world assumed was gone. One comment read, "My daughter ran away when she was 16. I made a scrapbook of every place I thought she might have loved to visit someday. She came home at 22. She said it was the scrapbook that made her believe she could still be forgiven. I wrote letters to my best friend for 7 years, even after she stopped answering. When she finally wrote back, she said she had kept every letter. They had kept her alive." Keanu's chest tightened with every new message. It wasn't just sadness. It was the overwhelming evidence that love, even unreturned, even unanswered, left marks that could save lives. He copied another note into his growing file. "Hope isn't weakness, it's armor." He smiled at that one. Then he came across a story so close to Margaret's that he sat back and let the words sink in. "My mom waited for me at the same corner for 2 years after I got clean. I was too ashamed to face her. But I saw her once from across the street. Seeing her there every week broke the wall I'd built inside myself. One Tuesday I crossed the street. The ending was simple. I crossed the street." Keanu pictured Margaret sitting there every Tuesday, waiting, watching, never knowing if Jason was closer than she thought. Maybe Jason had already seen her once. Maybe he had just needed more time to gather the strength. Keanu wasn't ready to assume the worst. Not yet. Not when Margaret's belief was so steady, so sure. He opened a new post on the forum titled, "Everyone Who Waited," and he wrote, "Maybe you never got the ending you prayed for. Maybe you're still waiting. But know this, your love traveled farther than you think. Even the ones who couldn't come back felt it. Even the ones who didn't know how to say thank you carried it with them. Love like that never disappears. It changes things, even when you can't see it." He hit post. Belio en pyramischen. Then he leaned back, letting the weight of 1,000 invisible threads connect him to every stranger who had once chosen to keep loving, even when the world told them to let go. Margaret wasn't alone, and neither was Jason. Somewhere out there, Keanu believed, the thread between them still held. Still waiting for the right Tuesday, still ready for the next crossing. As the sun dipped lower outside the foundation's windows, Keanu sat quietly, reading each comment as if it were a conversation whispered across years and miles. Every story was different, but they all carried the same heartbeat: someone who had waited, someone who had believed when there was no guarantee they would ever be seen again. Another comment stood out. I used to sit on the park bench outside my brother's halfway house every Sunday. I didn't ask to visit. I didn't ask for anything. I just wanted him to know someone was close by. When he finally walked out the doors for good, he told me, "I saw you every week. I just wasn't ready yet." Keanu copied that one too. The words etched themselves into his mind. "I saw you every week. I just wasn't ready yet." Maybe Jason had seen Margaret. Maybe Jason had been closer than anyone realized. Trapped not by geography but by shame, by fear, by the heavy chains of what-ifs and regret. Keanu thought about all the people who gave up too soon, not because they didn't love enough, but because carrying hope alone can be unbearably heavy. Margaret had carried it anyway, without applause, without reward, just love, steady and certain. Keanu refreshed the forum page one last time for the night. A new message had been pinned to the top by one of the moderators, quoting part of his post. "Your love traveled farther than you think." Beneath it, someone had commented, "Hope is never wasted. It's a miasma, even when the road looks empty." He smiled, feeling something settle in his chest. Not closure, not yet, but something close to courage. The courage to keep looking. The courage to keep waiting when needed. Before shutting down his laptop, Keanu opened his notes app and started a simple list titled, "For Margaret." He typed, "Search for Jason's old rehab center archives. Contact local shelters near the old address. Check musician forums for anyone using the name Jay or Jason. Visit the bus station every Tuesday for the next month. Believe." He underlined the last one. Believe. Because if Margaret could sit on that bench week after week, holding nothing but a photo and a memory, then he could do this small part. As he gathered his things and left the office, the night air met him cool and crisp. The city buzzed around him, bright and noisy, but Keanu felt the quiet presence of all the stories he had read that day. They weren't alone. None of them. And maybe, just maybe, on some Tuesday to come, hope would cross the street one more time. And this time, it would find its way home. The following week, Keanu sat in the Foundation's small research room with Sophia, the head of their outreach and case assistance team. Papers were spread across the table. Printouts of public rehab records, old directories, and lists from halfway houses that had been open in the late 90s and early 2000s. They had managed to find the name of Jason's rehab center, but not much else. Sophia clicked through a database, her brow furrowed. "I've checked 3 different public record systems," she said. "There's no discharge report, no transfer notes. After 1999, he's just gone." Keanu leaned back in his chair, feeling that familiar sinking sensation. It wasn't uncommon. People in recovery sometimes moved through unofficial channels, especially when facilities closed or changed ownership. But still, it was hard not to feel like Jason had simply vanished. Could he have gone somewhere else for treatment? Keanu asked. "Maybe," Sophia said. "But without a forwarding record, it's like chasing smoke." Keanu tapped his fingers against the table, thinking. "What about shelters?" he asked. "Or music programs?" Sophia looked up. "Music programs?" Keanu nodded. Margaret said Jason played guitar. He loved it. It was a huge part of his life. If he went anywhere after rehab, maybe he found somewhere he could still play. Sophia's eyes lit up. Community centers, youth arts shelters, recovery groups with music programs. It's a long shot, but it's something. Keanu smiled faintly. "Right now, I'll take long shots." They started building a new list. Places that offered music therapy, shelters with open mic nights, churches with outreach bands. youth programs that had music spaces for at-risk kids. As the list grew, Keanu felt something shifting. A direction. A thread. Jason might have stopped leaving official footprints, but maybe he had left behind a song instead. They divided up the work. Sophia would focus on archived shelters and community centers in the city and surrounding counties. Keanu would personally visit a few places still standing, the ones that might still remember a boy with a guitar and a promise written in blue ink. As they packed up the files, Sophia glanced over at him. "You really believe he's out there, don't you?" Keanu thought about Margaret sitting on that bench week after week, through 25 years of seasons changing and buses coming and going. "I believe if someone like Margaret could keep showing up for 25 years, he said, then maybe Jason's been trying to find his way back too. He grabbed the photo of Jason, now stored in a plastic sleeve to keep it safe, and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Hope was a fragile thing, but sometimes it was the only thing strong enough to last this long. The next morning, Keanu started with the nearest place on their list, a small community center tucked between a row of worn-out storefronts on the east side of town. The paint on the building had peeled back in places, but there were fresh flowers by the entrance and children's artwork taped to the windows. Inside, the smell of old books and coffee filled the air. A volunteer at the front desk, an older woman with silver hair tied back in a bun, looked up and smiled. "Can I help you?" she asked warmly. Keanu explained that he was searching for information about a young man named Jason who might have passed through their programs 25 years ago. He mentioned music, a guitar. The woman thought for a moment. "We've had a lot of kids come through here," she said, "but let me check the archives." She disappeared into a back room while Keanu waited, feeling the familiar tug of hope and dread battling in his chest. After a few minutes, she returned carrying a faded ledger and a box of old photographs. "No guarantees," she said, placing them gently on the counter. Keanu flipped through the ledger first, scanning names. Most of the entries were handwritten in neat, looping cursive. Names, dates, instruments played. A few lines caught his eye. J, guitar. But no last name, no address. He moved to the photographs next. Black and white shots of music classes, holiday concerts, summer fairs. Faces young and eager, arms slung around each other, instruments clutched proudly. Page after page. Keanu was about to close the box when something made him stop. The photo near the bottom, different from the others. It was more candid, a little blurry. A group of teenagers sitting on the floor of a small stage, guitars resting on their laps, sheet music scattered like fallen leaves. One boy sat slightly apart from the rest, strumming a guitar with his head bent low. Even through the grainy image, Keanu could see it. The same kind, unsettled look he had memorized from Margaret's photograph. It wasn't a perfect match, but it was close enough to make his heart jump. He showed the photo to the woman at the desk. She peered at it, adjusting her glasses. "That might have been Jay," she said. "We had a boy here around that time, quiet, polite, played by ear, didn't stay long." "Do you remember anything else about him?" Keanu asked. She shook her head. "Only that he used to hum while he played, like he was singing to someone far away." Keanu tucked the photo carefully into his notebook, with the woman's permission. Heart pounding. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was something. A shadow. A song still floating out there, waiting to be heard. Keanu left the community center with the photo carefully tucked into his jacket. As he stepped into the cool afternoon air, he felt something stir inside him. Something more than cautious optimism. It was the unmistakable feeling that the past wasn't as far away as it had seemed. He called Sophia as he walked back toward his car. "I found something," he said. Sophia's voice lit up. A record. A photo. From a music program 24 years ago. They called him Jay. No last name, but he played guitar, kept to himself, and used to hum while he played. Sophia was quiet for a second. "That matches what Margaret told you about him," she said. "She said Jason never liked being the center of attention. He just wanted to play." Keanu smiled faintly. Exactly. They agreed to meet at the foundation that evening to compare notes. As he drove, Keanu kept replaying the image of the boy in the photo, the way he hunched protectively over his guitar, the half-smile ghosting across his lips, the sense of someone holding music like a secret. By the time he arrived at the office, Sophia had already pulled a list of other centers in the nearby counties that offered music therapy. Many were long since closed, but a few still operated under different names. Keanu spread the photographs and notes across the conference table. "We're looking for someone who never completely disappeared," he said. "Just someone who slipped sideways through the cracks." Sophia nodded, catching his meaning. Jason might not have left a neat trail behind him. No credit cards, no employment history, no lease agreements. But maybe, just maybe, he had left chords and melodies scattered like breadcrumbs. The two of them worked late into the evening, piecing together bits of information, flyers from old benefit concerts, newspaper clippings about local open mic nights, mentions of community events where musicians were invited to play anonymously. Again and again, a pattern emerged. To small venues, unregistered names, acoustic sets where no one asked too many questions. Keanu found himself tracing lines on the map between places where Jason might have wandered, places where a man with a guitar could disappear into the music without anyone asking where he came from. They marked every lead, every half-remembered J, every old stage where the lights were low enough to hide a broken heart. At the end of the night, Keanu closed his notebook and looked at Sophia across the table. "We're getting closer," he said quietly. Sophia smiled tiredly but with genuine hope. "We are." Keanu thought about Margaret sitting at that bus station, still waiting, still believing. He thought about Jason, young, scared, and maybe still carrying his mother's hope inside him without even realizing it. The missing years weren't blank spaces. They were a trail written in invisible ink, and Keanu was determined to read every line. It was a rainy Thursday when Keanu decided to visit one of the last places on their list, a youth shelter that had barely survived the decades. The paint was chipped, the windows fogged with condensation, but the spirit of the place was still alive. A faded mural of musical notes wrapped around the entrance, like a whisper of what had once been important here. Inside, an older man sat behind a folding table, sorting through donation forms and faded flyers. His name tag read, Frank. Keanu approached slowly, explaining he was looking for any records, stories, anything about a young man named Jason, or maybe someone who went by Jay, who might have stayed there about 20 years ago. He mentioned music, recovery meetings, and guitars. Frank listened without interrupting, his lined face unreadable. Then he set his papers aside and stood up. "Follow me," he said. Keanu trailed him through the narrow hallways lined with corkboards and old photographs. They ended up in a small records room, musty but organized, filled with filing cabinets labeled by year. Frank pulled open a drawer marked 199-82001. "We didn't keep much," he said. "Privacy rules tightened up, but back then we kept little snapshots of the kids who wanted to leave something behind." He thumbed through a few folders, pulling out one marked simply, J Guitar. He handed it to Keanu. The file was thin. Just a couple of intake notes, a schedule of group meetings, and at the very back, a folded, wrinkled sheet of paper. Keanu opened it carefully. It wasn't an official form. It was a song. Written in scratchy handwriting, the ink smudged in places, but still legible. No title at the top. Just a set of lyrics, and halfway down the page, Keanu's breath caught. "No matter what, Mom, I'll find you." The same words, the exact same words Jason had written on the back of that photograph 25 years ago. Keanu stared at the page, feeling the weight of it settle over him like a blanket. Heavy, real, undeniable. Frank peered over his shoulder. "You know him?" he asked quietly. Keanu nodded slowly. Know someone who's been waiting a very long time to see him again. Frank pulled out a chair and sat down. Hal was a good kid, he said. Quiet, talented, kept to himself mostly, but when he played, you could hear it. The ache. The hope. Keanu folded the song sheet carefully, hands trembling just slightly. Did he stay here long? He asked. Frank shook his head. Couple of months, maybe. Then one day he was just gone. Left a note saying, "Thank you," nothing else. Keanu tucked the sheet into his notebook, his heart pounding. It wasn't just a lead. It was proof. Jason had tried to leave a piece of himself behind. He's still singing after all this time? Keanu sat with Frank a little longer, asking quiet questions, trying to piece together more about Jason's time there. Every fragment mattered now, every memory, every sliver of connection. Frank leaned back in his chair, arms folded loosely across his chest. He wasn't like the other boys who came through, Frank said thoughtfully. Most of them were loud, angry. Jason, he carried his hurt differently, like it was stitched into his bones. Keanu nodded slowly, imagining the boy Margaret had described, the one who brought her flowers and apologized for every mistake. Did he ever mention his family? Keanu asked. Frank shook his head. No names, just, "I gotta get better. I promised someone." That's all he ever said. Keanu looked down at the lyrics again, tracing the messy ink with his eyes. "No matter what, Mom, I'll find you." Even in the middle of his struggle, Jason hadn't forgotten. Even when life buried him under shame and silence, the promise had still lived inside him. Frank stood and rummaged through another file box near the wall. After a moment, he pulled out an old, grainy photo. A group shot of kids sitting on the shelter steps. Most smiled awkwardly at the camera, arms draped over one another. Near the back, slightly out of focus, was a figure sitting apart, a guitar across his knees. Keanu leaned closer. It was him. Older than the last photo, a little thinner, hair longer, but the same. The same eyes, the same small, searching smile. Frank tapped the photo with one thick finger. "He used to play out back after curfew," Frank said. "Not to show off, just for himself. Songs I'd never heard before. Sad ones. Beautiful ones." Keanu felt the familiar ache rise in his chest. "What happened to his guitar?" he asked. Frank sighed. "We kept it for a while after he left. Figured he might come back for it," he shrugged. "Eventually we donated it to another kid who needed one." Keanu nodded, understanding. Even so, Jason's music had lingered here. It had soaked into the walls, the concrete, the night air. Maybe it still did. He thanked Frank and slipped the copied song sheet and photograph into his bag. Outside, the rain had slowed to a soft mist, coating the streets in silver. Keanu pulled up the hood of his jacket and stood under the awning for a moment, staring out into the gray afternoon. He thought about Margaret, waiting by that bus bench. He thought about Jason, strumming melodies under a shelter's cracked light bulbs, whispering his promises into the dark. The world was so good at forgetting people like Jason, but not Margaret. Did not him. Keanu pulled out his phone and called Sophia. "I think we're closer than we thought," he said. "I've got something, a real lead." Hope flickered like a small flame inside him, fragile but steady. And this time, he intended to follow it all the way home. Keanu met Sophia later that evening back at the foundation office. The photo and the song sheet lay between them on the table under the soft glow of a desk lamp. Sophia studied the scribbled lyrics, her brow furrowed, her fingers lightly tracing the line that mattered most. "No matter what, Mom, I'll find you." "It's him," she said. Quietly, Keanu nodded. "It has to be." He pulled out his notebook, flipping to the timeline they had started building. The rehab entry, the youth shelter records, the sudden disappearance. All the pieces now pointed toward one truth. Jason hadn't given up. He hadn't walked away because he stopped caring. He had left pieces of himself, hoping someone would find them. Sophia tapped the photograph. If he stayed here, even for a little while, there's a chance someone else might remember him. Someone from the old shelters. Maybe from the music nights. Keanu leaned back, thinking. Music leaves fingerprints, he said. If he played anywhere else, someone would have heard him. Sophia smiled. Musicians remember each other. They spent the next 2 hours building a list of shelters, halfway houses, and music outreach programs that had been active around the time Jason would have left the youth shelter. Every place that had hosted open mic nights or recovery meetings. Every place someone like Jason might have ended up. Keanu felt the urgency building inside him. Margaret had waited 25 years. Jason had spent half a lifetime carrying his silence. It was time to find a voice that hadn't been lost, only waiting for the right person to listen. As they finished compiling their list, Sophia looked at Keanu across the table. You're really not going to stop, are you? He smiled. Not until they find each other. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened under streetlights, reflecting puddles like tiny pools of light. Keanu tucked the song sheet carefully into a folder marked Priority. Before they left, he stood alone for a moment in the lobby, staring at the wall of framed letters and photos. The collection the foundation kept to honor reunions, breakthroughs, and the people who refused to give up on each other. Soon, he hoped, Jason and Margaret's story would join them. Maybe a copy of Jason's song. Maybe a photo of a bench no one believed in except a mother who refused to move. As Keanu stepped out into the cool night air, he felt something different than he had felt at the beginning of this journey. It wasn't just hope. It was certainty. Jason had left a song behind, and now Keanu would follow it, all the way to the end. The next few weeks were filled with dead ends. Keanu and Sophia called every contact they had, old shelters, community centers, churches that once hosted recovery meetings. Some were closed. Others had changed staff so many times that no one remembered the names from 20 years ago. A few people thought they might have seen a Jay once, a quiet guitarist who never stayed long. But none could give anything concrete. No forwarding addresses, no family connections, no last names they could verify. Every time they hit another wall, Keanu felt the weight settle heavier on his shoulders. One night, after hours spent searching dusty public records, Sophia leaned back in her chair and sighed. There's one more thing, she said. It's a stretch. Keanu looked up, willing to hear anything. A few recovery groups reported a musician named Jay Rivers attending meetings in Northern California about 15 years ago, she said. No real paperwork, just a mention here and there. Jay Rivers, Keanu repeated, tasting the name. It felt close, but not close enough to grab onto. Sophia shook her head. No confirmed link to Jason, and no recent sightings. It could be anyone. Keanu stared at the whiteboard filled with scribbles, names, places, all fragments that refused to fit together. The trail had gone cold, and with it, doubt crept in. Late one evening, after yet another fruitless search, Keanu found himself driving past the bus station. He slowed when he saw her. Margaret, sitting exactly where she always did, a small silhouette framed by the glow of the streetlights. She was there. Oh, even after 25 years? Even without any new reason to believe. Keanu pulled into a nearby parking lot and sat behind the wheel, watching her for a while. Part of him wanted to get out, to tell her everything. The missed leads, the dead ends, the growing fear that maybe Jason hadn't survived. But another part of him knew he couldn't. He couldn't take away what she had built in her heart. He couldn't replace it with doubt. Not when her faith had been stronger than the years themselves. The rain began to fall lightly on the windshield, a soft patter that blurred the edges of the world outside. Keanu gripped the steering wheel, feeling the helplessness gnaw at him. What if Jason was gone? What if the song, the photo, the promise, they were all just memories now, floating in the spaces he could never reach? He thought about turning the car around, about going home and letting it be for the night. Instead, he made a different choice. He reached for his phone and opened the forum the foundation maintained for musicians in recovery. Anonymous, protected, wide-reaching. and he began to write. Keanu stared at the blank screen for a long moment, his fingers hovering above the keyboard. He didn't know exactly what to say, he only knew he had to try. Finally, he began to type, looking for a musician who once went by Jay or Jason, who had played guitar, used to hum while he played, last seen around shelters and open mic nights years ago. There's someone who never stopped waiting for him. If you were out there, or if you knew him, please reach out. No pressure, no judgment, just a promise kept. He reread the message twice, checking every word. He didn't want to sound desperate. He didn't want to scare anyone away. He just wanted Jason, or anyone who might know him, to feel the open door. Place where they could walk through without shame or fear. Keanu attached no personal details, no foundation name, no photos, just a quiet plea into the vast ocean of the internet. He hit post and leaned back, letting out a slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The rain outside grew heavier, streaking the windows in blurred rivers. For a while, Keanu sat there, watching the small green notification dot blink at the corner of his screen, waiting for any sign of life. Minutes passed. An hour. Nothing. Part of him expected that. The world was full of lost names and silent songs. Sometimes the people you loved didn't even know how to be found anymore. Still, he left the post up. Still, he waited. The next morning, Keanu visited the bus station again. Margaret was there, just like always, sitting straight-backed and patient, holding the photograph of Jason like a relic. He approached quietly, sitting beside her without needing to ask any more. She looked over and smiled, a small, tired smile full of infinite patience. "How's the search?" she asked, her voice warm and undemanding. Keanu hesitated. "I'm still looking," he said honestly. "It's harder than I thought it would be." Margaret nodded, as if she understood more than he said. "That's okay," she said. "You're here. That's enough." Keanu stared out at the bus doors, watching passengers come and go, their lives a blur of motion. He thought about how easy it would be to give up, to tell himself that it wasn't his burden to carry. But then he thought about Margaret. 25 years, 52 Tuesdays a year, more than 1,000 mornings where she chose hope over heartbreak. If she could keep choosing it, so could he. Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out the copy of the song lyrics, folding and unfolding the paper absently in his hands. "I think he's still out there," he said quietly. Margaret smiled again, more brightly this time. "So do I." And somehow, that was enough to keep him going, at least for one more Tuesday. Later that night, Keanu sat at his kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee, refreshing the forum post every few minutes. Still no replies. He'd told himself not to expect miracles, not after so long. But deep down, he knew miracles didn't always happen when you wanted them to. Sometimes they happened when you chose not to give up. He leaned back, thinking about all the small clues they had gathered. The song sheet, the photograph, the scribbled promise on the back of a fading image, tiny breadcrumbs scattered through a world too big to comb through completely. Somewhere out there, Jason might be living quietly under a new name. Or maybe he was still moving from place to place, carrying the music with him, like a whisper only a few would recognize. Keanu thought about the people who had crossed paths with Jason without knowing the full story, the strangers who had heard him play one sad, beautiful song and then watched him disappear again into the night. Maybe Jason wasn't lost. Maybe he was just waiting for the right person to find him, the right bridge to cross. Keanu glanced down at the wrinkled lyric sheet sitting on the table beside his coffee mug. His fingers tapped the words unconsciously. "No matter what, Mom, I'll find you." It wasn't just a promise from a scared young man. It was a vow still humming in the spaces between two people, separated by miles and mistakes, but never by love. His phone buzzed once, startling him. He grabbed it quickly, hope flaring. It wasn't a reply on the forum, just a weather alert. Rain tomorrow. More gray skies. Keanu set the phone down and smiled faintly to himself. It didn't matter. He'd show up anyway. He thought again of Margaret, sitting there faithfully with that old photo folded between her hands like a prayer. She never demanded anything. She never raged against the years. She just waited. And somehow, by waiting, she had turned a lonely bench into a lighthouse. A place someone lost might still find. Keanu stood and turned off the kitchen light, letting the house slip into a quiet calm. Tomorrow was another day, another chance. He didn't know how long it would take. He didn't know what shape the answers would come in. But he knew one thing without a doubt. He wouldn't quit. He wouldn't let the trail grow cold without fighting to reignite it. Because somewhere out there, Jason's song was still playing. Soft, hidden, waiting. And Keanu intended to follow it. Every note, every chord, until the music led him home. 3 days passed. Keanu checked the forum every morning and every night, half expecting silence. By the third day, he almost didn't bother. He was tired, running on little sleep, the weight of Margaret's hope resting heavier on his shoulders than ever. But when he refreshed the page that morning, something new appeared. A private message. His heart kicked hard against his ribs as he opened it. Subject: I might know him. From Daniel. The message was short, careful, but it made Keanu sit up straighter. I saw your post. I knew a guy named Jay about 15 years ago. We were both at a halfway house in Fresno. He played guitar like no one else there. Used to hume while he played. Said Tuesdays were his day. Always talked about a bus station and his mom. He called it his North Star. I don't know what happened to him after that, but if it's the same guy, he never forgot her. Keanu read the message twice, then a third time, letting the words sink in. A bus station, a mother. Tuesday's my day. It wasn't coincidence. It couldn't be. His hands trembled slightly as he typed a careful reply. Thank you so much for reaching out. Can you tell me anything else you remember about Jay? Where he might have gone after the halfway house? Anything could help. He hit send and leaned back, heart hammering. He didn't dare let himself hope too much yet. It was a fragile thing, this connection, a thread stretching across time, ready to snap if pulled too hard. But it was real. It was something. And after weeks of chasing shadows, it was more than he had dared hope for. Keanu sat there, staring at the screen, willing the little typing notification to appear. After what felt like an hour but was probably just a few minutes, a new message popped up. Daniel had replied. Daniel's next message was longer, almost hesitant, as if he were sorting through memories that had been packed away for too long. Jay wasn't like the others. Most of us were just trying to survive day by day, but he talked about the future like it was still waiting for him. He used to sit out back by the old tree behind the house, playing that beat-up guitar. He'd hum the same melody over and over, real soft. Said it was the song he promised to finish for his mom. Keanu read it slowly, feeling the emotions build with each line. Had this battered notebook, too, full of lyrics and sketches. I remember one time I asked him why he kept writing all these songs when he didn't even perform anywhere. He just smiled and said, because one day I'll play for the person who's been waiting for me the longest. Keanu swallowed hard. The ache in his chest deepened. This wasn't just a passing mention. This wasn't just a maybe. This was Jason. He hadn't forgotten. Even after all the broken years, even after all the silence, Jason had carried his mother with him through every dark corner he traveled. Keanu quickly typed back, did he ever mention where he was going, a city, a name, anything at all? He waited, tapping his fingers against the desk in anxious rhythm. Another reply came, not much. One night, he said, if he ever got it together, he was heading south. Gotta find my Tuesday bench, he called it. He never explained more, but I'll never forget that. Tuesday was everything to him. Keanu leaned back, exhaling slowly. Tuesday was everything. Margaret had sat on that bench every Tuesday for 25 years, and somewhere out there, Jason had marked the same day in his heart like a compass pointing home. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, letting the truth of it settle. Jason hadn't given up. He hadn't forgotten. The world had tried to erase the trail, but Jason had fought to keep it alive, even if only in pieces. Keanu opened his notebook, flipping to the map Sophia had drawn weeks earlier, the one marking shelters and recovery houses stretching southward from Fresno. Jason had said he would head south. Keanu's finger traced the line, city by city, wondering where the trail might have led. He messaged Daniel one more time. "Thank you for remembering him. You gave hope to someone who's been waiting a very long time." Daniel's reply came quickly. "Tell her he never forgot. Tell her he was still trying to come home." Keanu sat there for a long while after the messages stopped coming, staring at the words on the screen. Then he smiled. A quiet, trembling smile. Because now he had something real to bring back to Margaret. Now he had a new beginning. And he wasn't going to stop until he finished what Jason had started. The next Tuesday, Keanu returned to the bus station with something new in his heart. This time, he wasn't just showing up out of duty or stubbornness. This time, he was bringing something real. Margaret was already there, sitting on her bench, the worn photograph cradled between her palms like always. She looked up when she saw him, offering that soft, familiar smile. Keanu sat down beside her. For a while, they watched the buses roll in and out, the routine unchanged, the ritual still sacred. Finally, Keanu turned toward her. "I heard from someone," he said quietly. Margaret's hand tightened slightly around the photograph. A man named Daniel. He knew Jason, or Jay, as he called himself, about 15 years ago. Her breath caught, but she said nothing, waiting. Keanu continued, choosing his words carefully, knowing every one mattered. "No," said Jason used to talk about you, about this place, about Tuesday being his day, his North Star. Margaret closed her eyes, just for a moment, as if holding the words inside, where they could never be lost. "Hey, Hal." "Didn't forget you," Keanu said. His voice was steady, even as emotions swelled in his chest. Not for a second. Margaret's lips trembled, and she pressed the photo gently to her heart. "Did he say where he went?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Keanu shook his head. Only that he was heading south, that he was still trying to find his way back. A tear slipped down Margaret's cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sorrow. It was something deeper, something like peace. "For so long," she said softly, "I just needed to know he remembered." Keanu reached out and placed his hand lightly over hers, and even the waitress's. They sat like that for a long while, two strangers bound by a promise neither of them had made, but both of them honored. Finally, Margaret looked out at the arriving buses. "Maybe he's still out there," she said. "Maybe he's still trying." Keanu nodded. "Maybe he's closer than we think." Margaret smiled, the kind of smile that only comes from years of waiting and years of believing. "I'll keep coming," she said, "as long as it takes." Keanu squeezed her hand gently. "And I'll keep looking." In the distance, a bus pulled up with a soft hiss, and new passengers stepped out into the fading afternoon light. The world kept moving, indifferent and busy. But on that little bench, something had shifted. The waiting wasn't just waiting anymore. It was a beacon. A light left on for someone still finding his way home. And as Keanu stood and promised himself he would not give up, he knew the thread that connected Jason and Margaret had never been broken. It had just been stretched thin over time, waiting for the right moment to pull them back together. One Tuesday, one bus, one heartbeat at a time. That night, Keanu sat in his office at the foundation, staring at the glow of his laptop screen. The conversation with Margaret kept replaying in his mind. The way she had clutched the photograph, the way she had smiled when he told her Jason hadn't forgotten. It wasn't closure. It wasn't the end of the story, but it was enough to keep hope alive. Keanu opened the Foundation's forum, the same one where he had first posted about Jason weeks earlier. Thousands of people visited it now. People who had lost someone, people still waiting, people hoping to be found. He clicked New Post and let his hands rest on the keyboard for a moment before typing. There are promises we make that time tries to erase. Promises spoken in passing or in pain or in hope, so fragile it feels impossible. But some promises don't break. Some stay stitched into the heart, waiting for the right moment, the right crossing, the right Tuesday. If you could say one thing to someone you lost, what would it be? Because sometimes, even if they can't hear it, they need to know you waited. They need to know you believed it. Keanu posted the message without overthinking it. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, and waited. It didn't take long. Replies started coming in almost immediately. Stories spilled onto the forum like a flood. Some heartbreaking, some healing, all of them real. One user wrote, "I'd tell my brother that I forgave him long before he ever asked for forgiveness." Others shared, "I tell my mom that every time I sing. It's for her. She taught me music was another way of saying I love you." Keanu scrolled slowly, reading each story with a quiet reverence, feeling the weight of each unseen bond. Someone posted, "I waited at the same coffee shop for 3 years after my best friend disappeared, never saw her again. But I still go there sometimes, just in case." Another wrote, "My son left home at 17. I never stopped setting a place at the table, not because I thought he'd walk through the door, but because I needed him to know there would always be a seat waiting for him." Keanu felt his chest tighten. Hope wasn't foolish. Harrington told me to get lost. It was fierce. It was the strongest thing some people had left. And somehow, in all the years and silences and broken places, it still found ways to reach across the distance. A new reply popped up, one that made Keanu pause. It's simple. Sometimes they don't need to hear it. They just need to know you waited. Keanu reread that sentence over and over, letting it settle deep inside him. It was true. It had always been true. Waiting wasn't about words. It was about love, strong enough to hold space where none seemed left. A promise strong enough to outlast silence. Keanu sat back, staring at the glowing screen, letting the words from that last comment echo inside him. Sometimes they don't need to hear it. They just need to know you waited. It was a reminder that some connections didn't need explanations. Some didn't even need to be spoken aloud. The act of waiting itself was the message. He clicked through more responses pouring into the thread. A father wrote, "If I could say one thing to my daughter, it would be, you were never too broken for me. Never." A sister posted, "I'd tell my brother I never replaced him. I just kept missing him in different ways." Keanu found himself wiping at his eyes, not out of sadness exactly, but because of the raw, beautiful honesty pouring from complete strangers. One comment struck him especially deep. "When my son was lost to addiction, everyone told me to move on. I didn't. I kept sending letters, even when they were returned unopened. 5 years later, he walked through my door, holding every single one." Another simply said, "Love never wasted itself on hope. Hope was the proof that love was real." Keanu strolled slowly, absorbing the patterns. None of these people had perfect endings. Many never found the ones they lost. But the common thread weaving through every story was the same. Waiting was never wasted. Love, even unanswered, still built bridges. Even if the ones they were waiting for never crossed them. Even if the only thing that crossed was memory. Keanu smiled faintly, feeling a kind of silent kinship with all of them. Each person who wrote, each one who still hoped, had become part of something bigger than just loss or longing. They had become part of a quiet army of believers. People who carried torches into the dark, even when no one else could see the light. He thought again of Margaret, sitting with her photograph, brushing dust off her memories with the patience of someone who understood that the heart kept time differently than the world. She didn't need Jason to say the perfect words when he came back. She just needed him to know she had never stopped believing he could. Keanu opened a blank document and started copying some of the most powerful comments. He wasn't sure what he would do with them yet. Maybe print them for Margaret. Maybe create a wall of hope at the foundation. Maybe just keep them for himself, on the hard days, when the search felt heavier than he could carry. Whatever he decided, he knew one thing for certain. Every single story mattered. Every moment of faith, every inch of waiting, every silent Tuesday spent sitting on an empty bench. It all mattered. Hey, it always had. As the night deepened, Keanu kept reading. Every few minutes, new stories surfaced. Some were just a few words. Others poured out like rivers that had been dammed for years. One woman wrote, "I sat outside my father's nursing home every Sunday for 6 months. He never came out to see me, but the nurses said he always smiled when he saw me through the window. That was enough." Another, "If I could say one thing to my mother, it would be, I knew you were waiting. Even when I couldn't come home, I felt you." Keanu could almost see the invisible threads stretching across cities, across countries even. Threads of connection, of waiting, of belief, that somehow, against everything, love still mattered. He posted a quiet reply beneath the original thread. "For those still waiting, your patience is seen. Your love is not wasted. Somewhere, someone carries the memory of you, even if they can't find the words to say it yet." More responses followed. People thanking each other for their honesty. People promising to write letters they never dared to send. People saying, "I thought I was the only one." Keanu realized that Margaret's story wasn't just rare. It was universal. Every bench, every porch light left on, every birthday card never returned. They were all part of the same symphony of hope. And maybe, just maybe, they were enough to guide lost hearts home. The idea made him stand and walk to the window, staring out into the city lights stretching like constellations across the night. How many people out there were still waiting? How many were holding on to photos, old letters, songs scribbled in notebooks? Keanu thought again about Jason, wherever he was. Did he still carry that melody in his heart? Did he still hum it when the nights grew too quiet? Some part of Keanu believed he did. He had to, because love, like Margaret's, didn't vanish. It didn't die in silence or drown in distance. It stitched itself into the marrow of the ones it touched, whether they knew it or not. Keanu returned to his desk and printed out a few of the most powerful comments. He placed them carefully into a folder, labeled simply, "Tuesday Bench, Messages of Hope." He would give them to Margaret soon. Maybe not all at once. Maybe just one or two at a time. Little reminders that her waiting wasn't empty, that she was never alone on that bench. And maybe one day, when Jason found his way home, he would sit beside her and realize he hadn't been forgotten either. He had been carried every Tuesday, every missed year, every missed chance. And now, the bridge between them was being rebuilt. One word. One song. One heartbeat at a time. The breakthrough came on a quiet Thursday afternoon. Keanu was sitting at the foundation office going through the latest round of emails when one stood out. It was from a halfway home in a small rural town, 2 hours north of where Jason had last been mentioned. The subject line was simple. Inquiry about Jay Rivers. Keanu opened it immediately. The message was brief, written by the director of the facility. We had a resident named Jay Rivers about 7 years ago. He stayed for a little over a year. Completed the program successfully. Quiet man. Played guitar sometimes for the others. Always talked about a bench and Tuesdays. We don't have a forwarding address, but you're welcome to visit and speak with staff who knew him. Keanu's heart pounded. This was more than a rumor. This was real. Without hesitation, he grabbed his jacket, tucked Jason's old photo and song lyrics into a folder, and headed out. The drive was long and winding, the scenery shifting from urban sprawl to open fields and dense trees. As he approached the small town, he noticed how the landscape quieted, the noise and rush of city life replaced by a softer rhythm. The halfway home was a modest building set back from the main road, surrounded by gardens that volunteers had clearly spent time caring for. Flowers lined the walkway. A few residents sat on the front porch, playing cards and laughing under the late afternoon sun. Keanu approached the front desk, introducing himself. A middle-aged woman with bright eyes and a name tag that read Anna greeted him warmly. "You're here about Jay," she said, almost knowingly. Keanu nodded. "I'm trying to find him, or at least find out where he might have gone." Anna smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "Goes special," she said. "Quiet but kind, always willing to help with chores. Played his guitar out by the garden when he thought no one was listening." Keanu felt that familiar ache. "Do you know where he went after he left?" he asked. Anna shook her head. "Hell didn't tell anyone exactly, just said he had a promise to keep. Something about a bench. Tuesdays." Keanu's throat tightened. It was the same story, repeated by every person who had crossed paths with Jason. A promise that refused to be forgotten. Anna hesitated, then said, "There's someone else you should talk to." She led Keanu down a hallway to the small infirmary wing where a retired nurse named Carla still volunteered a few days a week. Carla was folding laundry when they arrived. She looked up, and when Anna explained why Keanu was there, her face softened with recognition. "I remember Jay," Carla said. "He had a way of making you feel like you mattered, even when he barely spoke." Keanu pulled out the photo and handed it to her. Carla studied it carefully. "That's him," she said with certainty. "No doubt about it." Keanu felt a ripple of relief as Carla confirmed it. This wasn't just another dead end. This was Jason, or at least the closest he had come so far. It was quiet, but you could tell he carried a lot, Carla continued. Pain, regret, but also hope. You don't see that much after everything most of these men go through. Keanu nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle heavily inside him. "Do you remember anything specific?" he asked. "Anything that might help me find him now?" Carla thought for a moment, then smiled sadly. Kathy talked about music a lot, and about his mom. He'd sit outside sometimes, strumming the same tune over and over. Said he was saving it. Finishing it would mean he was ready. Keanu leaned in. "Did he say where he might go when he was ready?" Carla shook her head. "No address. No city. Just..." She paused, eyes softening. Mel said he was going to the place where someone was still waiting for him. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment. The bench. The promise. It was always about getting back to Margaret. Jason hadn't let go of it, not even after all the broken years. Carla hesitated again, then added, "He showed me once. A scar. Said he got it when he was a kid, playing in the backyard. Fell into a rose bush, left a mark right here." She tapped her left wrist. Keanu's eyes widened. Margaret had mentioned the same thing on their second meeting, describing how Jason had fallen into the garden as a boy chasing after a runaway soccer ball. She had laughed through tears when she said it, remembering how he insisted afterward that roses were traitors. "It's scar," Keanu said quietly. "It's real." Carla nodded. It was faint, but it was there. Keanu pressed a hand against his chest, feeling the familiar mix of hope and fear surge through him. Jason was real. He had been so close, so alive. But where was he now? "What happened when he left?" Keanu asked. Carla's face grew more serious. "Helm finished the program, graduated with one of the best records we'd ever seen. No infractions, no relapses. He had this peace about him, like he finally believed he deserved to find what he'd been missing." She smiled faintly. He glanced at the door, and didn't say goodbye, just left a note on the staff board. Keanu's heart pounded. Do you still have it? Carla chuckled. I might. I keep little things like that. Reminds me why we do what we do. She disappeared into the back room, leaving Keanu standing there, every muscle tight with anticipation. He thought about Margaret again, sitting at that bench, waiting every Tuesday without fail. He thought about Jason, carrying her memory through halfway houses and shelters, never letting go of the one place he still called home. Somewhere, their story was still unfolding, and Keanu intended to help write the next chapter. After a few minutes, Carla returned, holding a small, battered box filled with papers, photographs, and handwritten notes. She placed it gently on the table between them. It's not organized, she said with a soft laugh, but I think it's in here somewhere. Keanu sifted through the contents carefully, scanning for anything that might carry Jason's name or even a clue. Old birthday cards from former residents, thank you notes, a few sketches done during art therapy sessions. Finally, tucked near the bottom, he found a folded piece of paper with two simple words scribbled in rough handwriting. Keep believing. Keanu turned it over, and in the corner, a name, small and faint. J.R. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Carla leaned over his shoulder. That's his, she said firmly. He left it the night before he disappeared. Keanu carefully tucked the note into his folder alongside the song lyrics and the old photograph. Thank you, he said, voice thick with emotion. Carla placed a hand on his arm. Wherever he is, I think he's still trying to get back to her, she said. Some journeys just take longer. Keanu nodded slowly, feeling the full weight of what she meant. Hope wasn't fast. It wasn't loud. It was patient, steady, a quiet pulse that kept beating even when everything else went silent. He stood and shook Carla's hand firmly. As he walked back to his car under the lengthening shadows of the late afternoon, he felt lighter than he had in weeks. Not because he had found Jason yet, but because now he knew Jason hadn't stopped looking for his way home. Keanu sat behind the wheel for a few minutes before pulling out onto the road, the worn note sitting on the passenger seat beside him like a companion. Keep believing. That's what Jason had written. That's what Margaret had lived by. And now, that's what Keanu carried with him too. The drive back was long, but he didn't mind. He replayed every story he had gathered, every description of Jason humming to himself, playing guitar for invisible audiences, whispering promises into the cold nights. They all pointed to the same truth. Jason hadn't abandoned hope. He had simply taken the long way home. As the first stars blinked into the night sky, Keanu made a silent vow. He would find him. No matter how many roads it took, no matter how many Tuesdays passed. He would follow the melody Jason had left behind, note by note, until it led all the way back to that old bus station bench where Margaret still waited with her photograph, her hope, and her heart wide open. And this time, when Jason arrived, someone would be there to walk him home. It was a tip from Carla that pointed Keanu in the right direction. Before he left the halfway home, she had mentioned a small music cafe just a few miles away, a place where recovering artists sometimes gathered for open mic nights. It wasn't fancy. No flashing signs, no big crowds. Just a dimly lit room, a small stage, and a handful of people who understood what it meant to still be trying. Keanu decided to go. He didn't expect much. Maybe he would hear a few songs, drink a cup of lukewarm coffee, and leave with no more answers than he had before. But something tugged at him. Something that whispered, Tuesday is his day. When he pulled into the gravel parking lot, the sun was already dipping low, washing the world in gold and blue. A wooden sign swung gently in the evening breeze. The Lighthouse Cafe, open mic Tuesdays. Keanu sat for a moment, staring at the door. Then he took a deep breath and stepped inside. The room was small, cozy. A few mismatched tables, string lights draped across the ceiling, the soft hum of conversation and tuning instruments filling the air. He found a seat near the back and ordered a black coffee. The stage was empty for now, just a stool and a single mic standing ready. One by one, local performers took the stage. A young woman sang a cover of an old folk song. An older man recited a poem. Two teenagers fumbled their way through a clumsy but heartfelt guitar duet. Keanu applauded politely, but his eyes kept drifting toward the far side of the room, where a man sat alone, tuning a beat-up acoustic guitar. He was thin, maybe mid-30s or early 40s, with dark hair tucked under a baseball cap. His posture was guarded, his movements careful, like someone who had spent a long time learning how to take up less space. When it was his turn, he walked slowly to the stage, not announcing his name, not offering any introduction. He just started playing. A soft, aching melody filled the cafe. He understood it. It wasn't a song he recognized exactly, but there was something about it. The sadness tucked into the notes, the quiet hope woven through the chords. It was the kind of song written for someone who might never hear it, but played anyway because hope demanded it be sung. Keanu watched, heart pounding. The man's hands were steady on the strings, but his eyes never rose from the guitar, like he was singing to someone far away, someone he didn't dare believe might be listening. When the song ended, the room offered gentle applause, respectful and warm. The man gave a quick nod and turned to leave the stage. Keanu stood up. He didn't think. He just called out, voice steady but filled with something deeper than certainty. "Jason?" The name seemed to hang in the air, heavier than any note that had filled the cafe. The man on stage froze, one hand still resting on the neck of his guitar. Slowly, painfully, he lifted his head and looked out across the room. His eyes found Keanu's, and for a long moment, nothing moved. No one else in the cafe seemed to notice the shift in the atmosphere, but Keanu felt it like a current pulling tight between them. The man blinked, his whole body stiff with something more than surprise. It was fear, recognition, guilt. Keanu stayed still, not moving toward him, not pushing. He had learned by now that sometimes the heart needed space to catch up with the truth. The man stepped down from the stage, guitar clutched like a shield against his chest. He walked toward the exit, hesitated, then glanced back at Keanu. Their eyes locked again. Keanu spoke softly. Just for him. "She's still waiting." The man's face crumpled, just for a second, before he turned away, disappearing through the front door into the cooling night air. Keanu followed at a distance, giving him space. Outside, the man stood in the parking lot under the flickering cafe sign, his shoulders hunched, his hands trembling slightly. Keanu approached slowly, careful not to corner him. "I'm not here to force anything," Keanu said quietly. "I just want you to know, she never gave up on you." The man didn't answer at first. He stared down at the cracked pavement, breathing hard. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough and low. "Way now," he rasped. "After all this time." Keanu's chest tightened. "Because it's never too late," he said simply. The man shook his head, bitter. He deserved better than what I became. Keanu stepped closer, but still kept a respectful distance. "She never asked for perfect," he said. "Only for you to find your way back." The man laughed, but it was hollow, broken. "I'm not who she remembers." Keanu's voice softened. "Maybe not. But you're still her son. That never changed." The man scrubbed a hand over his face, the baseball cap falling off, revealing dark, messy hair, threaded with strands of gray. He looked older than his years, worn down by choices and regrets and too many lonely miles. Keanu reached into his jacket and pulled out the worn photograph Margaret had entrusted to him. He held it out without a word. The man stared at it. A boy, 18 years old, smiling uncertainly at the camera. Or a boy with hope still bright in his eyes. Slowly, the man reached for it. His fingers brushed the edge of the photo, and for a moment he just stood there, staring down at the past he had run from for so long. When he finally looked up at Keanu, tears streaked silently down his face. "You're really here for me?" he whispered. Keanu nodded. "And so is she." Jason gripped the photograph with both hands, as if anchoring himself to something he was afraid would vanish. Keanu stood quietly, letting him have the time he needed. After a long moment, Jason spoke again, his voice breaking. "I wanted to come back so many times. I even made it to the station once, but I couldn't get out of the car. I was too ashamed." Keanu's heart ached at the rawness in his words. "She's not waiting for an apology," Keanu said gently. "She's waiting for her son." Jason shook his head slowly. "You don't understand. I promised her I'd be better. I promised I'd make her proud. And all I did was break every—" Keanu took a slow step closer, lowering his voice even more. "You kept the one that mattered," he said. "You survived. You stayed alive. And you never forgot her." Jason stared at him, breathing hard, like he was trying to hold back the years of grief and guilt crashing down all at once. Keanu reached into his jacket again and pulled out a folded copy of the lyric sheet, the song Jason had written long ago in that shelter. The one with the same words he had scribbled on the back of the photograph. "No matter what, Mom, I'll find you." Keanu handed it over without a word. Jason unfolded the paper slowly, his hands trembling. When he read the line, he let out a shuddering breath, a sound so full of pain and longing that Keanu had to glance away for a second, giving him the dignity of his grief. "I never thought anyone would find this," Jason whispered. "But you left it," Keanu said. "Some part of you wanted to be found." Jason nodded, wiping his face roughly with the sleeve of his jacket. "What do I even say to her?" he asked, voice hoarse. Keanu smiled gently. "You don't have to say anything perfect. Just show up. That's all she ever wanted." Jason folded the lyric sheet carefully, placing it in his jacket pocket like it was something sacred. He stood there for a while longer, staring up at the sky where the stars were just beginning to pierce the velvet dark. Finally, he turned back to Keanu, eyes red but steadier now. "Will you come with me?" he asked quietly. Keanu nodded without hesitation. "Every step," he said. Jason let out a broken laugh, a laugh that sounded like someone remembering how to breathe. "Tuesday," he said, almost to himself. "It has to be Tuesday." Keanu smiled, wider. "Then Tuesday it is." They stood together for a moment longer before walking slowly toward the parking lot. Side by side, two men carrying the fragile beginnings of something precious. Not a perfect ending, but a second chance. And sometimes, Keanu thought as they disappeared into the night, that was even better. The drive back toward the city was quiet. Jason sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, the folded photograph clutched loosely in his lap. Keanu kept his eyes on the road, giving him the space he needed. Every few miles, Jason's hand would brush the photo again, like he had to reassure himself it was still there, still real. Finally, about halfway into the drive, Jason spoke, his voice raw. "I thought she moved on." Keanu glanced at him. Jason shook his head slowly, as if trying to argue with himself more than with Keanu. "I figured, after everything I put her through, after all those years, she must have realized she was better off." Keanu tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "You're wrong," he said gently but firmly. "She never missed a Tuesday." Jason turned to look at him, confusion etched into every line of his face. "What do you mean?" Keanu took a breath. "Every Tuesday for 25 years, your mother sat at that same bus station, same bench, same time. She never stopped waiting. She never gave up." Jason blinked rapidly, like the words couldn't quite land. "That's not possible," he whispered. "Nobody waits that long. Not for someone like me." Keanu's voice softened even more. "I'm dead." Jason pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, struggling to breathe. The truth was too big, too heavy. It cracked something open inside him that he had spent years trying to seal shut. "All this time," he said, voice shaking. "All this time I thought I was forgotten." Keanu pulled the car onto a quiet side road and parked. He turned toward Jason, giving him his full attention. "She never forgot you," he said. "She didn't stop believing. Not for a second." Jason dropped his hands, revealing a face carved with disbelief and pain. "I didn't think I deserved it," he said, almost to himself. "I messed up. I hurt her. I failed." Keanu leaned forward slightly. "You were a kid who got lost. You fought your way back the best way you could, and she never stopped loving you through it." Jason covered his mouth with one hand, stifling a sob. For a long time, he just sat there, shoulders shaking, the years of guilt and shame breaking free all at once. Keanu stayed silent, letting him fall apart. Because sometimes you had to break open before you could heal. When Jason finally looked up, his face was wet with tears. "There's something I need to tell you," he said hoarsely. Keanu nodded, ready to listen. Jason swallowed hard. "For years, every Tuesday, I went to different bus stations. I'd sit outside. I couldn't make myself go to the right one. I was too scared." Keanu's heart twisted. Even in his fear, even in his shame, Jason had been trying in the only way he knew how. And now, finally, the truth had a chance to finish what love had started. Keanu listened, his chest aching as Jason wiped at his eyes, the confession leaving him smaller somehow, like a boy caught in the act of hoping for something he wasn't sure he deserved. "I would sit there for hours," Jason said quietly, staring down at his lap. "I'd watch the buses come and go, every Tuesday. I kept thinking maybe I'd see her by accident. Maybe she'd find me first." He let out a broken laugh. "Stupid, huh?" Keanu shook his head firmly. "No, it's not stupid." Jason looked up at him, the disbelief still flickering behind his red-rimmed eyes. "I didn't even know if she still lived here. I thought maybe she moved away. Maybe she got tired of waiting." Keanu's voice was steady, anchoring. "She never moved. Never changed her Tuesday. She said if you ever came looking, she didn't want to be anywhere else." Jason pressed the photograph against his chest like a shield. "This time, I thought I lost her." Keanu leaned back in his seat, letting the moment breathe. "You didn't lose her," he said quietly. "You just took the long way home." Jason's shoulders sagged, the years of running, of hiding, of convincing himself he wasn't worthy, crumbling under the truth. "She still wants to see me?" he asked, voice cracking. Keanu smiled, gently. "He's been waiting for you like it's the first Tuesday, every single time." Jason looked away, blinking back more tears. "I don't even know what to say to her," he admitted. "How do you walk up to someone after 25 years and—" He shook his head helplessly. Keanu thought about Margaret, about the soft strength in her eyes, the quiet faith she wore like armor. "You don't have to say anything perfect," Keanu said. "You just have to show up." Jason let out a shaky breath. "I'm scared." Keanu nodded. "I know." The car was silent for a long moment, the weight of the years between Jason and Margaret thick in the air. Then Jason said, almost in a whisper, "She waited for me, even when I didn't wait for myself." "Yes," Keanu said softly, "because love like hers doesn't quit." Jason turned the photograph over, tracing the scribbled promise on the back with trembling fingers. "No matter what, Mom, I'll find you." He let out a sound halfway between a sob and a laugh. "I guess it's time I finally keep that promise." Keanu smiled, feeling the deep swell of something bright and fierce rising between them. Hope. Not the easy kind. The earned kind. The kind that comes after the long nights and broken dreams, after all the reasons to give up. The kind that chooses to believe anyway. Jason folded the photograph carefully and placed it back into his jacket. Then he looked at Keanu, eyes clearer than they had been all night. "Will you come with me?" he asked. Keanu nodded without hesitation. "All the way." Keanu started the car again, easing them back onto the road under the velvet sprawl of night. Jason sat quietly beside him, his fingers twitching now and then as if strumming an invisible guitar, nerves and anticipation threading through every motion. The city lights came into view on the horizon, blinking like small beacons. Jason broke the silence first. "What if she's different?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Keanu kept his eyes on the road, but his voice was calm. She probably is. You are too. But love doesn't care about who we used to be. It cares about who shows up now." Jason nodded slowly, absorbing that. He turned the photo over again, rereading the promise for what must have been the 100th time tonight. For a long while, neither of them spoke. There was a reverence in the silence, the kind that only exists between two people who both understand the weight of second chances. As they neared the city limits, Jason leaned forward slightly, peering out the window. "That bench," he said softly. "I used to imagine it. Every Tuesday when I sat somewhere else, I pictured it. Her sitting there, holding a coffee, maybe reading a book." Keanu smiled faintly. "She was there." Jason swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. "I wasted so much time." Keanu shook his head. "You survived it. That's what matters." The streets grew more familiar now. Jason tensed as Keanu made the final few turns, the bus station coming into view like a ghost from an old life. Keanu pulled into a parking spot across the street and cut the engine. They sat there for a moment, just breathing. Jason clutched the photograph tightly, the edges worn soft from his hands. "Do you want me to go first?" Keanu asked gently. Jason shook his head. "No, I need to do this." Keanu smiled. "I'll be right here." Jason opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air, the city humming softly around them. Keanu watched him cross the street, each step slow but certain. At the far end of the station, the familiar figure was there. Margaret. Same bench. Same worn coat. Same hope stitched into every line of her face. Jason hesitated on the sidewalk, staring at her like she might disappear if he blinked. Keanu saw the way his hands shook, saw the way he almost turned back. But then, Jason took a breath, squared his shoulders, and moved forward. Not fast, not perfect, but forward. And that was enough. Keanu stayed in the shadows, letting them have their moment. As Jason approached, Margaret looked up. Their eyes met. Time folded in on itself, the years falling away, leaving only the boy who had promised and the mother who had waited. Margaret stood slowly, her hands trembling. Jason opened his mouth, but no words came out. He didn't need them. He just stepped forward, and Margaret pulled him into her arms like he had never been gone. Tuesday arrived like a held breath. Keanu pulled into the lot across from the bus station and turned off the engine. Beside him, Jason sat silently, the photograph tucked carefully inside his jacket pocket. The morning was crisp, the sun barely lifting above the skyline. The world felt quieter somehow, as if even the city knew something important was about to happen. Jason tapped his fingers against his knee, a restless rhythm betraying the storm churning inside him. "She might not recognize me," he said softly. Keanu shook his head. "She moved." Jason offered a tight, nervous smile. Across the street, Margaret was already there, sitting exactly where she always did. Same bench. The same photo clutched between her trembling hands. Keanu watched her for a moment, feeling a lump rise in his throat. The way she leaned forward slightly, as if listening for footsteps she had dreamed about for decades. Jason took a long, shaking breath. "Are you ready?" Keanu asked. Jason nodded once. He opened the door and stepped into the morning light. Keanu stayed behind, giving him the moment he had waited for his entire life. Jason crossed the street slowly, each step heavier than the last. When he reached the edge of the platform, he hesitated. Margaret was staring down at the photo in her hands, lost in thought. Jason took one more breath, gathering the shards of courage he had pieced together over the years. Benny moved forward. Margaret must have sensed him because she looked up. Their eyes met. Across the worn cement platform, across the years of silence and searching, mother and son locked eyes. Jason froze, his heart hammering so hard he thought he might collapse. But Margaret didn't look shocked. She didn't look angry. She didn't even look surprised. She just looked home. Slowly, she rose to her feet, the photo falling to her side as her hands reached out, trembling but sure. Jason stepped forward, his body moving before his mind could catch up. The world around them blurred. The buses, the people, the noise. All of it faded until there was only the two of them standing there, tethered by something stronger than time. Jason stopped a few feet away, afraid to move closer, afraid to break the fragile miracle unfolding between them. But Margaret took that final step. She reached out and touched his cheek, her fingers light but sure, like she was memorizing every line, every scar, every moment that had been lost. Tears filled Jason's eyes. Still no words came, until Margaret whispered, so softly he almost didn't hear it. "You kept your promise." Jason choked on a sob and collapsed into her arms. And for the first time in 25 years, the bench at the bus station was no longer a place of waiting. It was a place of return. Jason clung to Margaret like a man who had spent a lifetime adrift and had finally found solid ground. Margaret held him just as tightly, her hands moving over his back in slow, steady circles, like she was soothing the lost boy he used to be. Neither spoke for a long time. They didn't need to. The weight of what they carried, the regrets, the lost years, the fragile hope that somehow survived it all, spoke louder than any words could. Margaret pulled back slightly, just enough to look at him. She cupped his face in both hands, her thumbs brushing tears from his cheeks. Jason tried to speak, but his voice cracked and broke before he could form a sentence. Margaret shook her head gently. "No explanations," she said. "Not today." Jason nodded, overwhelmed with gratitude for her mercy, for her endless, patient love. She smiled through her tears. "You're here, that's all that matters." Jason let out a shaky laugh, the sound wet and broken but real. "I almost didn't come," he admitted. Margaret's smile didn't falter. "But you did." He stared at her, memorizing every line in her face, every sign of time that had passed, and every bit of unwavering strength that remained. "I missed so much," Jason whispered. Margaret leaned her forehead against his. "So did I," she said quietly. "But we're here now. That's what matters." Around them, the world carried on. Buses pulled in and out. Announcements crackled over the loudspeakers. Commuters hurried past without sparing them a glance. But for Jason and Margaret, the rest of the world had faded away. Jason reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded lyric sheet, the one Keanu had given him, the one that had never been truly lost. He held it out to Margaret, his hand shaking. She unfolded it slowly, her eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. When she reached the bottom, her breath caught. Her fingers traced the final line. "No matter what, Mom, I'll find you." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but her smile only grew. "You're dead," she whispered. Jason broke then, crumbling into her arms again, the last of his walls falling away. Margaret held him up, her arms stronger than they looked, her heart carrying the both of them. Keanu watched from across the street, unseen by the small crowd milling about. He stayed back, letting them have their moment, feeling a lump in his own throat that he didn't bother trying to swallow. This wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of a new one. One built not on guilt or regret, but on forgiveness, on grace, on the kind of love that didn't need perfect words or perfect timing, just a heart willing to wait, and a heart brave enough to return. Jason and Margaret stood there in each other's arms as the morning light grew stronger, warming the bench, the sidewalk, and the space between two souls who had finally found their way home. After a while, Margaret led Jason by the hand back to the bench. They sat side by side, just like they had once long ago when he was a boy too restless to stay still, and she was a young mother who believed in every dream he had. Jason leaned back, staring up at the sky, feeling the world tilt slowly back into place. Margaret tucked the photo into her bag and pulled out a thermos of coffee she had brought, same as every Tuesday. She poured 2 small cups from the lid and handed one to Jason with a soft chuckle. "I always brought 2, she said, "just in case." Jason took it, his hands trembling slightly. He stared at the steaming cup for a long moment before smiling. "You always believed I'd come back?" Margaret nodded without hesitation. "Every Tuesday, I believed a little more." Jason blinked back fresh tears, overwhelmed by the simple, stubborn beauty of her faith. They sipped coffee together in silence, watching the buses come and go, neither in a rush, neither needing to fill the quiet with anything but their shared presence. After a few minutes, Jason pulled out the battered guitar case he had carried with him. Margaret looked at it curiously. "I never stopped playing," he said, almost shyly. "I wasn't very good at much else, but the music stayed." She smiled warmly. "I always hoped it would." He opened the case carefully, pulling out the old guitar. It was worn, scarred, but lovingly maintained. Jason strummed a few tentative chords, his fingers finding the shape of songs written long before he had the words to explain what they meant. Then, without warning, he began to play. A soft melody filled the air, quiet and full of aching hope. It wasn't a perfect song. Some of the notes trembled, some chords slipped, but it was real. Margaret listened with closed eyes, letting the music weave through her like a prayer answered after a lifetime of asking. Jason sang a few words, the same ones he had scribbled all those years ago. "No matter what, Mom, I'll find you." Margaret opened her eyes and met his gaze, tears shining but her smile radiant. "You did, sweetheart," she said, voice thick with emotion. "You found me." Jason's voice cracked as he finished the song, the last notes lingering between them like a blessing. When he set the guitar down, Margaret reached for his hand and squeezed it tightly. "Welcome home, Jason," she whispered. Jason squeezed back. "I'm home," he said, his voice steady for the first time in a long, long while. They sat there together long after the last bus pulled away, long after the crowds thinned, holding on to the simple miracle that, after all the broken years, all the missed chances, and all the lonely Tuesdays, they had kept their promises to each other. And in the end, that was enough. That was everything. The sun climbed higher, warming the cracked concrete under the bus station bench. Jason and Margaret sat side by side, cups of coffee resting between them, the old guitar lying across Jason's lap like a sleeping memory. For a while, they didn't say much. They didn't need to. The silence between them was easy now, full of the kind of comfort that only came from finding what had once been lost. Eventually, Jason broke the quiet, his voice rough but steady. "I should have come sooner." Margaret reached over and squeezed his hand. "You came when you could," she said. "That's enough." Jason looked down, guilt flashing across his face. "I spent years wasting time, running. I was scared you wouldn't want to see me." Margaret smiled gently. "I never stopped wanting to see you. Not even once." Jason swallowed hard, nodding. He brushed his fingers across the worn edges of the lyrics sheet tucked into his jacket pocket. "I stayed clean for a while," he admitted. "Then I slipped, got back up, slipped again." Margaret's hand never left his. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "Not because you were perfect, because you never gave up." Jason let out a shaky breath, the kind that feels like the first real exhale after years underwater. "I want to stay in recovery," he said after a moment, "for myself, but also for you." Margaret's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they came with a smile too wide to hold back. "I want you to stay for you first," she said, "but I'll be here every step." Jason laughed through the emotion, tightening his chest. "Still, every Tuesday?" Margaret chuckled. "Every Tuesday." Jason leaned back against the bench, the morning sun warming his face, and closed his eyes for a moment. It felt like the world had shifted back into focus, like for the first time in years, he wasn't walking alone. He turned to her again, smiling shyly. "Maybe we could make it official." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Official?" Jason nodded. "Meet here, every Tuesday. Not because you have to, not because I need to find you anymore, but because we choose to." Margaret's smile grew until it lit her whole face. "I would like that very much," she said. They had lapsed back into comfortable silence, sipping coffee, sharing stories about the years they had missed. Jason told her about the shelters, the halfway houses, the tiny moments of hope he had clung to. Margaret shared stories of how she kept busy, how she always packed 2 cups of coffee just in case. They laughed. They cried. They filled the empty spaces between them with the steady weaving of something stronger than time. Across the street, Keanu watched quietly from a distance, leaning against his car. He didn't move. He didn't interrupt. He just stood there, smiling softly, knowing this was their time now, and they had earned every single second of it. Margaret pulled out a small notebook from her bag, the corners frayed and the cover faded. Jason looked at it curiously. "What's that?" he asked. Margaret smiled, brushing her hand over the worn surface. "My Tuesdays," she said simply. "I started writing little notes every time I sat here. Letters to you, prayers, sometimes just memories." "Jerusalem, Jason." Jason reached out, his hand hovering uncertainly. Margaret placed the notebook in his palm without hesitation. He opened it slowly. Inside, page after page, her careful handwriting filled the lines. "Today is cold. I wonder if you're somewhere warm. I heard your favorite song on the radio. It made me smile and cry at the same time. Wherever you are, I hope you feel loved." Jason's throat tightened with every word. He flipped through the pages, each one a timestamp of her unwavering hope. Margaret watched him with a soft, patient smile. "I didn't know if you'd ever see them," she said, "but it helped me feel close to you." Jason closed the notebook gently, holding it against his chest. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. Margaret placed her hand over his. "You deserve all of it," she said firmly, "and more." Tears welled in Jason's eyes, but this time he didn't fight them. He let them fall. Because sitting there, on that worn old bench, with the sun on their faces and the city bustling quietly around them, he realized something important. He wasn't alone anymore. He hadn't been for a long time. He just hadn't been ready to believe it until now. Margaret leaned in closer. "We can start new traditions," she said. "We can fill the next pages together." Jason smiled, the kind of smile that comes after surviving the storm. "I'd like that." He glanced across the street, spotting Keanu leaning casually against the car, watching them with a soft, satisfied look. Jason nodded at him, a silent thank you. Keanu gave a small wave, but didn't move. He knew this moment belonged to them. Jason turned back to Margaret. "I used to dream about this," he said. "About coming back. About it being too late." Margaret squeezed his hand. "It's not too late," she said. "It's just the beginning." Jason laughed, a real unguarded laugh that seemed to lighten the air around them. "I think I'm ready to believe that." Margaret smiled back, her eyes crinkling at the corners, the lines of time telling a story not of loss, but of love. They stayed like that for hours, those talking, laughing, sometimes just sitting in silence, letting the years they had lost begin to heal in the only way they could, together. By the time the afternoon sun began to drift low, casting long shadows across the platform, they had already made a plan. Next Tuesday, same time, same bench. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Because sometimes the greatest promises aren't the ones made out of desperation, but the ones chosen freely, again and again. As the sun dipped lower, Jason and Margaret stood slowly, gathering their few belongings. Jason slid the notebook carefully back into Margaret's bag, as if handling something sacred. Margaret folded the worn photograph one more time, tucking it into her coat with a tenderness that said she didn't need it to remember anymore. But she wanted to keep it close, just the same. They walked down the platform side by side, their steps slow but sure. Jason carried the guitar, the strap slung loosely over his shoulder, and Margaret kept a hand lightly resting against his back, a touch both steadying and gentle. Across the street, Keanu finally straightened up from where he had been leaning. He stayed still, watching them walk together without rushing to join. Some moments needed space to breathe. Some moments deserved to be witnessed, not interrupted. Margaret and Jason reached the end of the platform and paused at the curb. Jason turned to her, nerves flickering briefly across his face. "Same time next week?" he asked. Margaret smiled so brightly it felt like the sun itself nodded. "I'll be here," she said. Jason looked down at the guitar, then back at her. "Maybe next week. I'll bring a song just for you." Margaret laughed lightly, wiping at her eyes. "I would love that." Keanu crossed the street finally, approaching slowly. Jason spotted him first and waved. Keanu returned the wave, smiling warmly. Margaret looked up at him, her face full of gratitude too large for words. "Thank you," she whispered. Keanu shook his head gently. "I just helped you find each other, the rest was all you." Jason grinned, a little sheepish. "I was pretty lost." Margaret looped her arm through his. "And now you're fonded." Keanu watched them together, feeling something settle deep in his chest, a kind of peace he didn't often get to touch. He knew this wasn't the end of their journey. There would be hard days ahead. Recovery wasn't a straight line. But now, Jason didn't have to walk it alone. He had a place to anchor him. A person who never stopped believing in him, even when he couldn't believe in himself. Margaret squeezed Jason's arm lightly. "Let's go get some dinner," she said. "I think 25 years earns you a few pancakes." Jason laughed, the sound ringing bright and free. "I could eat a whole stack." Keanu chuckled. "Go, enjoy. I'll see you both soon." Jason hesitated, then stepped forward and pulled Keanu into a quick, rough hug. "Thank you," he said again, voice low but full of meaning. Keanu clapped him on the back. "You're welcome." As Margaret and Jason walked off down the sidewalk, their laughter trailing behind them, Keanu stood there a moment longer, watching. The bench sat empty now, but it no longer looked lonely. It looked like a promise kept. A new beginning. And somewhere deep inside, Keanu knew this story, like so many others he had found himself a part of, was far from over. It was only just beginning. Months later, the bench was no longer just a bench. It had become something else, something sacred. The city had taken notice of Margaret's story after it quietly spread through the community, shared by volunteers, whispered by bus drivers, retold by travelers who passed by every week. One morning, without fanfare, a small bronze plaque appeared, bolted to the back of the weathered bench. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't large. It was simple and beautiful, just like the story it honored. The inscription read, "Before the promises that time could not erase." When Margaret and Jason arrived that Tuesday, coffee cups in hand, they both stopped short. Jason stared at the plaque, blinking rapidly. Margaret covered her mouth with one hand, her shoulders trembling, not with sadness, but with something deeper. Gratitude, recognition, love. They sat down slowly, feeling the weight of the years settle gently around them, no longer a burden, but a memory, stitched with grace. Margaret reached out and ran her fingers over the engraving, her touch tender. Jason sat beside her, silent, overwhelmed. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply let the morning unfold around them. Buses rumbling, people rushing past, the world spinning on as it always had, but now with this small, shining marker of something that endured when everything else said it shouldn't. Jason cleared his throat, finally. "We made it permanent," he said, voice rough with emotion. Margaret smiled through her tears. So did we. They sat for hours that day, talking about nothing and everything. Plans for next week, dreams for Christmas. Old memories of Jason's stubbornness as a boy and Margaret's quiet, steady faith through the storm of his absence. Other travelers noticed the plaque too. At first it was just glances, curious looks from passers-by. But soon, something beautiful began to happen. People started leaving small notes tucked into the cracks of the bench. Some were written on scraps of paper, folded hastily. Others were neatly penned on postcards or pressed carefully into tiny envelopes. Messages of hope, prayers for missing children, estranged parents, lost friends. A simple sentence left behind one morning read, "Still waiting, still believing. If you see this, know I still love you." Margaret and Jason began bringing extra blank cards with them each Tuesday, slipping them under the bench for others to use. It became a quiet ritual, a community of unseen hands reaching out, leaving pieces of themselves stitched into the fabric of hope the bench had come to represent. One afternoon, Jason found a little drawing tucked into the side, a child's crayon sketch of two stick figures holding hands. He smiled and handed it to Margaret, who tucked it into her bag alongside her notebook. The bench wasn't just theirs anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever waited. Everyone who had ever hoped beyond reason. Everyone who had ever chosen to believe that some promises, no matter how long they took, could never be erased. The weeks rolled by, and every Tuesday, Jason and Margaret returned to their bench. It didn't matter if it rained or if the heat baked the pavement. They showed up. Because now, it wasn't just about waiting. It was about honoring everything they had survived to find each other again. Each week, there were more notes tucked into the bank. Some were from teenagers apologizing to parents they hadn't spoken to in years. Others were from mothers praying their sons would come home safe. A few were just simple hearts drawn on scraps of napkin or receipts left behind without words. One morning, Margaret found a note that simply said, "This bench makes me believe again." She pressed it to her heart before sliding it carefully into her notebook. Jason watched her, his own heart full to bursting. "I used to think all my mistakes were too big to fix," he said quietly. Margaret looked at him with that same patient love she always had. "They weren't mistakes," she said. "They were part of the path that led you back here." Jason shook his head, overwhelmed again by her forgiveness, her relentless grace. "I don't deserve a mother like you." Margaret smiled softly. "Maybe not, but you have one anyway." He laughed, wiping at his eyes. People walking by sometimes paused now, reading the plaque, sitting for a few moments in silence, sometimes adding a folded slip of paper to the growing collection under the bench. The bus station didn't clear them away. Someone, maybe an unseen worker, maybe just a kind stranger, had placed a small plastic box under the bench to keep the letters safe from the rain. Inside it, dozens of folded notes now lived, breathing hope into the weary travelers who stopped to rest. Jason brought his guitar sometimes, playing quietly while Margaret wrote in her notebook. Sometimes Keanu visited too, sitting across the street with a coffee, waving when they spotted him, always giving them their space, but staying near enough to be a part of the rhythm they had created. One Tuesday, as Jason played a soft tune on his guitar, a little boy wandered up to the bench, holding a crumpled piece of paper. Margaret smiled and helped him tuck it into the box. The boy grinned and ran back to his mother, who gave a small, tearful wave before hurrying away. Jason watched them go, the music catching slightly in his throat. "We're not just healing ourselves anymore," he said quietly. Margaret squeezed his hand. "We're healing everyone who ever sat and waited." Jason let the truth of that sink in. It wasn't just about the past. It was about the future they were building now. One song, one letter, one Tuesday at a time. And with every note tucked into the bench, every song played on a worn guitar, the message grew stronger. Hope was still alive, and it had found a home on that simple wooden bench. As summer slipped into fall, the bench continued to gather its quiet army of stories. Some notes stayed tucked safely under the box for weeks, while others disappeared, taken perhaps by the people they were meant for or carried away by strangers who needed the hope more than they realized. Margaret and Jason began reading some of them aloud during their Tuesday visits. A letter from a daughter apologizing to her father. A note from a brother promising to find his sister again. Messages that, even if they never reached the right hands, sent ripples into the world. One rainy afternoon, Jason found a note written in careful handwriting. "I don't know if you'll ever come back, but I want you to know I'm still here, waiting. Always." He folded it carefully and placed it back inside the box. Margaret noticed the way his hands lingered. "That could have been you once," she said gently. Jason nodded. "It was me," he admitted. "It still is, a little." Margaret squeezed his arm. "Now you're also the one who came home." Jason smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't about forgetting the past, but about honoring how far he had come from it. Across the street, Keanu leaned against his usual spot by the coffee cart, smiling to himself as he watched. He loved seeing the tiny, almost invisible ways hope grew stronger every week. No speeches, no grand announcements, just people showing up, choosing forgiveness, choosing faith, choosing to believe that some promises could survive anything. One Tuesday, Jason brought a small wooden frame with him. Inside it, he had placed the original lyric sheet he had scribbled so many years ago at the youth shelter, the one that had connected him back to Margaret. Margaret touched the frame reverently, her eyes glistening. The store, and before that, no one else would. Margaret looked surprised. "Are you sure?" Jason nodded. "This belongs to the bench now, to everyone who needs to know that even the faintest promise can still find its way home." With Keanu's help, they mounted the frame just below the plaque. Now, when travelers sat on the bench, they could read not just the inscription, but also the raw, handwritten words of a boy who had once been lost and had found his way back. Margaret leaned against Jason, tears shining but a smile steady on her face. "You're giving people something to hold on to," she whispered. Jason wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "I think they're giving it right back." They sat like that for a long time, surrounded by the hum of the station, the fluttering notes tucked under the bench, and the music of a world where healing could happen, not all at once, but one heart at a time. And the bench, once just a place of waiting, became a place of beginnings, a place where the broken could believe again, where promises, no matter how battered, still came true. The Recovery Center's benefit concert wasn't anything fancy. There were no big spotlights, no grand stage. Just a community hall filled with folding chairs, coffee brewing in the corner, and a crowd of people who knew what it meant to lose, to hope, and to try again. Jason stood backstage, clutching his guitar so tightly his knuckles turned white. He peeked out through the curtain and spotted Margaret sitting in the front row. She wore her best blue sweater, the one Jason remembered from his childhood, and in her lap she clutched the old, worn photograph of him as a teenager. The same photo she had brought to the bus station every Tuesday for 25 years. Their eyes met, and she smiled, wide and steady, the kind of smile that said, "You're not alone. You never were." Jason took a breath and looked down at the worn lyric sheet folded in his jacket pocket. It was time. The MC called his name, and he walked out onto the small stage under the soft yellow lights. The room grew quiet. Jason sat on the stool at center stage, adjusted the mic, and looked out over the crowd. There were faces lined with the same battles he had fought, the same mountains he was still climbing. He cleared his throat, tapped the body of his guitar gently, and spoke. "This is a song about a bench," he said, "but really it's about a promise." He lowered his gaze to the strings and began to play. The opening chords were soft, almost fragile. The melody carried the weight of waiting, the ache of years slipping by, the quiet thread of hope stitched through every empty Tuesday. Jason's voice cracked slightly as he sang the first lines. "I sat on different sidewalks, searching for your face. Every street I wandered whispered your name." Margaret leaned forward, pressing the photo against her heart. Jason's fingers found strength as he played, the chords growing bolder, the words rising. He sang of falling down, of missing birthdays and Christmases, of living in the shadows, too afraid to step into the light. And then the song shifted. The melody lifted. The words wove a new story, not of being lost, but of coming home. You sat on the bench where the world rushed by, coffee in one hand, the years in your eyes. Never stopped believing, never let go. You were the lighthouse when I didn't know. The room was utterly still. No one coughed. No one stirred. It was as if every heart in that small hall was holding its breath, suspended in the simple, aching truth pouring out of him. Jason's voice softened as he reached the final verse. The line he had written in a lonely shelter years ago found its way home tonight. Jason's fingers moved instinctively now, as if the guitar was simply an extension of everything he had never been able to say. He closed his eyes, letting the words guide him through the final chorus. No matter how far I wandered, no matter how long the night, you were the home I could still find. You were the light I followed home. The last note lingered in the room, trembling in the quiet like a prayer that had finally been answered. Jason opened his eyes slowly. The crowd was silent for a heartbeat longer. Then the applause came. Not wild, not loud, just steady, deep, and full of the kind of respect that could only come from people who knew what it meant to fall and stand again. Jason bowed his head humbly, his heart pounding. He looked toward Margaret. She stood clapping, tears running down her face, but her smile beaming with pride that lit up the entire front row. The photograph still rested against her chest, as if she were holding the boy who had finally kept his promise. Jason stepped away from the microphone and carefully placed his guitar into its stand. He didn't rush off stage. Instead, he stood there for a moment longer, letting the weight of everything he had carried lift away into the room. Shared now, no longer just his own burden. After the applause softened, Keanu appeared at the side of the stage, giving him a small nod of encouragement. Jason smiled back, grateful beyond words for the quiet strength Keanu had offered through the hardest parts of the journey. As Jason made his way down the steps and into the waiting arms of his mother, the room blurred around him. Margaret hugged him fiercely. "You kept your promise?" she whispered again. Jason held her just as tightly. "I found my way," he said back. Margaret pulled back just enough to look into his face. "And you helped others find theirs too." Jason hadn't thought about that. But seeing the tearful smiles of strangers around the hall, the way a few people wiped their eyes and held each other tighter, he realized it was true. His story, their story, wasn't just for them anymore. It was for anyone who had ever waited, anyone who had ever hoped, anyone who had ever believed that love could outlast even the longest road home. Margaret handed him a folded piece of paper. He opened it, finding a simple note written in her careful handwriting. "Every Tuesday, forever. Wherever you are, I will find you." Jason smiled so wide it hurt. "Forever," he promised. Margaret took his arm, and they walked together toward the back of the hall, where the crowd parted to let them through. Not as strangers anymore, but as a family, not defined by the years lost, but by the music, the promises, and the love that had survived them all. Later that evening, after the crowd had dispersed and the folding chairs had been stacked in neat rows, Jason and Margaret walked back to the bench at the bus station. The night air was cool but gentle, the city lights flickering like distant stars. Jason carried his guitar slung across his back, and Margaret held onto his arm, steady and sure. When they reached the bench, they stood for a long moment in front of the plaque, for the promises that time could not erase. Margaret brushed her fingers over the engraving, smiling. Jason set the guitar down gently by the bench. Without a word, he pulled out the original lyric sheet again, the one that had been framed and copied but still carried the weight of that first desperate promise. He unfolded it slowly, the edges worn soft by time and hands and hope. Margaret sat down on the bench, patting the spot beside her. Jason joined her. For a while they just sat there, breathing in the familiar rhythm of the buses pulling in and out, the low murmur of the city settling into night. Jason cleared his throat. "I never thought I'd have a second chance," he said quietly. Margaret leaned her head against his shoulder. "Second chances are real," she said. "You just have to be brave enough to take them." Jason smiled, resting his cheek lightly against her hair. "I was scared every step of the way," he admitted. Margaret squeezed his hand. "But you walked it anyway." Jason let out a slow, contented breath. They stayed that way for a long time, letting the world spin quietly around them. A woman pushing a stroller passed by and smiled at them. A teenager with a skateboard nodded in quiet respect. An older man with a weathered face tucked a note into the box under the bench without saying a word. The bench had become more than wood and metal. It was a living testament to watching, to waiting, to forgiving, to finding. Jason picked up his guitar again and began to play softly. A new song this time, unfinished, still rough around the edges, but full of life. Margaret closed her eyes and listened, her smile never fading. As Jason played, he thought about the long years lost, the Tuesdays spent in different places, too afraid to find the right one. And he thought about how, somehow, love had waited anyway. When he finished the song, Margaret opened her eyes. "That was beautiful," she whispered. Jason grinned. "It's a work in progress." Margaret chuckled. "Aren't we all?" They laughed together, the sound echoing softly across the empty platform. Jason stood up, slinging the guitar back over his shoulder. Margaret rose too, tucking her arm through his. They took one last look at the bench before walking away together into the night. Stronger, together, finally home. The bench sat quiet under the dim glow of the streetlights, no longer a symbol of waiting but a beacon of what it meant to believe when there was no guarantee of return. Sometimes the ones who leave aren't truly lost. They are simply trying to find their way back, through miles of regret, through years of silence, through fears too heavy to carry alone. And sometimes, all they need is to know that someone is still there. Still believing, still waiting. Margaret had waited, not with anger or blame, but with open hands and an open heart. And when Jason finally found his way back, it wasn't just Margaret's arms that welcomed him. It was the entire life she had kept, ready for him, without ever knowing if he would return. In a world that often demands quick results and easy endings, their story stood against the current. It whispered that real love doesn't give up when things get hard. It doesn't walk away when the road stretches longer than anyone expected. Real love stays, even when it hurts, even when it seems foolish, even when everyone else says to let go. Margaret didn't let go. Jason didn't stop hoping, even when he couldn't face it head on. And somehow, against all odds, a promise made in the shaky handwriting of a desperate teenager was kept. It took decades. It took brokenness and healing. But it happened. The world didn't announce it. There were no flashing lights, no headlines. Just a quiet reunion on a worn bench, a few tears, a lot of laughter, and a love that proved time has no power against true connection. As Margaret and Jason sat together, their Tuesdays no longer filled with loneliness but with shared coffee and shared dreams, they became a living testament to something rare, something precious. The belief that it's never too late. The belief that even if you fall 100 times, even if you lose your way for years, there is still a way back. Always. If you have someone waiting, if you have a promise that time cannot erase, and if you have the courage to take that first trembling step toward forgiveness, toward healing, toward home. The world needs more benches like that, more hearts willing to wait, more hands willing to reach across the years, more people brave enough to believe in each other again. So today, wherever you are, whoever you're thinking about, whoever you're still hoping to find, know this: it's not too late. It never was. So if you've ever kept a promise for someone you loved, even when it hurt, even when the world told you to move on, you're part of this story too. You're part of the hope that refuses to die. You're part of the love that stays rooted when everything else tries to pull it away. Maybe your person hasn't found their way back yet. Maybe the waiting feels heavier with each passing day. But somewhere, in a corner of their heart, your faith in them is still burning, still pulling them forward, even if they can't see it yet. Love is never wasted. Hope is never in vain. Sometimes it just takes longer for the right song to reach the right ears. Sometimes the notes drift across years, across broken dreams and tired hearts, until finally, one ordinary Tuesday, the music carries them home. If you could say one thing to someone you're still waiting for, what would it be? If you could leave one note tucked into the cracks of the world, like the ones under that old bench, what would your message say? We would love to hear your incredible story. Have you ever kept a promise for someone you loved, even when it hurt? Share your story below in the comments. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you believe in second chances, if you believe that love can outlast anything, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. Because coming up next, Keanu finds himself in the heart of another quiet miracle. While visiting a run-down building for a charity shoot, Keanu hears the sound of someone playing Chopin flawlessly on an old, battered piano. The player is a teenage girl raised by her grandmother after her father, once a famous concert pianist, disappeared from her life. What Keanu soon discovers is that her father has just been released from prison. Haunted by guilt, too ashamed to reach out, he watches from a distance, afraid he's lost the right to be part of her life. But through secret letters, music lessons, and the healing power of melodies that carry what words cannot, Keanu gently helps rebuild a bridge between a father and daughter who still carry the same song in their hearts. You won't want to miss this next incredible story about forgiveness, hidden talents, and the music that finds us even when we are lost. Sometimes the smallest sound carries the biggest message, and sometimes all it takes to change a life is to listen for it. We'll see you in the next video.